Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House in New York and to the book talk with Icelandic author Thóra Hjörleifsdóttir and translator Meg Matich on the release of the new novel Magma. This talk is moderated by Larissa Kyzer, and the book is being released today on July 13th by Black Cat. I would like to extend my thanks to Black Cat Grove Atlantic for helping make this event possible. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll ask these questions towards the end of the program. The talk is being recorded and will be made available on our website, scandinaviahouse.org, as well as our YouTube channel. A link to where you can purchase the books will also be added to the chat box. Moderating today is Larissa Kyzer, who is a writer and Icelandic literary translator. She was the Princeton University Fall 2019 translator in residence and is a member of OS, an Icelandic-based international literary collective, as well as the American Literary Translation Association. Her translation of Kristin Eriksdóttir, A Fist or a Heart, was awarded the American Scandinavian Foundation's 2019 Translation Prize. She is the co-chair of PEN America's Translation Committee and runs a bi-monthly NYC-based Women Plus in Translation reading series called Jill. Please welcome Larissa, who will introduce Thóra and Meg.
Hello, and thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So I just want to introduce both of our speakers today. Thóra Hjörleifsdóttir has published 3 poetry collections with her poetry collective Imposter Poets. She lives in Reykjavik, and Magma is her first novel. Meg Matich earned her Master's of Fine Arts from Columbia University's Creative Writing and Literary Translation program. She's received support for her literary translation work from PEN, the Icelandic Literature Center, the DOD, the Fulbright Commission, and many others. She has translated poetry into both English and Icelandic as a representative of Reykjavik UNESCO City of Literature, and Magma is her 4th full-length publication. So welcome to both of you. Just to get us started, I just want to say congratulations on Publishing Day. It's very exciting to see this book make it into English. And since it is Publishing Day, our listeners won't have had a chance to read the book yet. So, Thóra, you said that in an interview, this book is about the dark side of love. And one of the quotes in the interview was, if we think about love as a coin, then on one side, it's bright and good and wonderful, it's exciting. But on the flip side of the coin, there's this anxiety, insecurity, and obsession. One reviewer called it a horror story about love, and I personally think it's a really vivid portrait from the inside out of a relationship that turns abusive slowly and almost covertly. And I think it offers a really interesting answer to the question, why does she stay? Which I think is very commonly asked of people who are in abusive relationships. But I would love to hear from you, Thóra. Would you mind giving the audience a quick summary in your own words of what the book is?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Magma is a story about love in the time of pornification, and it's about a very unhealthy relationship, and it's about sex and love and boundaries and how a person can completely lose herself when she stops honoring her own boundaries in order to try to please someone else. The main character, Lilja, is a girl in her 20s who has everything going for her. She's smart, she's independent, she has a nice and loving family and supportive friends, and she just falls in love with the wrong guy. She meets this handsome, smart guy who constantly rejects her and treats her like shit, but this doesn't push Lilja away, because she is convinced that she will eventually prove to him that she is worthy of his love, or maybe she just feels like she doesn't really deserve any better. Magma is a blunt and uncomfortable story, and when I was writing it, my intention was to explore the undercurrent of love and the obsessive and humiliating manic state a person in love can find herself. And by doing that, by going into this horrible darkness, my hope was that maybe I could partake in destigmatizing the shame and isolation so many people have experienced and kept quiet about when they've been in toxic relationships.
I think that's a wonderful summary, and I think it's a really bold, and it's a very brave book, and that actually kind of leads us quite well into my second question, which was to talk about sort of the reception and the sort of like broader context of this book in Iceland, because it came out in 2019, and Me Too as a movement really kind of kicked off around 2017. And I think abroad, Iceland is often thought of, in some ways quite fairly, as something of a feminist paradise. And it's been often called like the best place in the world to be a woman, and performs very well on things like the gender gap index. But that tends to belie the fact that there is a dark side to that, and there's a pretty startlingly low rate of prosecution of rape and intimate partner abuse. And I think this became more evident during the lockdown. There were two women who were killed by intimate partners within the first couple of weeks of lockdown in Iceland. And so I think that as relevant as this book was when it was published, which was granted not that long ago, I think it's become all the more relevant now. And so I'm sort of interested if you could talk about the way that the book was received when you first published it, and if you think that it's going, if you feel like people are talking about it differently now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the last person who knows how people are talking about the book now. But I think that, I mean, when the book came out, it was very well received, and it was like critically and commercially, it did very well, and today, and in the weeks and the months before the book was published, I was terrified that people would, misunderstand my point with the novel, and I would be perceived as some pervert for having written this book. And I was working as an elementary school teacher at the time when I was writing it, and I was teaching the youngest ones, and the story has some very, graphic descriptions of sexual violence and intimate relations. And so I was worried that I was just flushing my reputation down the toilet by writing this book, but that didn't happen. I mean, the book became a bestseller, and it really struck a chord with a lot of its readers. And I got, just in the following weeks and months when the book came out, I got so many emails and messages from women who thanked me for writing it, and for who related to the experience of the main character in some way. But today, like, it's hard to say like how it's being received today, but I know of a few brave junior college literary teachers who have Magma as a part of their curriculum. And they are, reading the book with kids who are, like 18, 19 years old, and they're tackling all the difficult but necessary questions that arise when you read that book. And I think that's really healthy, and I'm very hopeful for that generation. And I generally think that young people are so much smarter in this sense than I was, or the generation before me. So, but the fight for gender equality and women's safety, like, I don't really think that this book is going to like change that much. I mean, hopefully, but that fight is a long game. So we'll just have to see how that turns out.
I mean, I think in some ways it like I did see, I saw an article that was talking about the fact that this should be taught to young people, and I think that no, it's unlikely that this book is going to, like, you know, completely fix these immense long-standing issues that also keep getting more complicated in these different ways. But I think the fact that it's encouraging this dialogue to start younger, and also like a really frank dialogue between young people and like different generations, I think is also really important. So I think that's a really, I do think that's a really hopeful step, and seems to be, like, from your dedication at the front of the book, which dedicates the book to people who have spoken out about this sort of violence. I think that is I think it feels like it really taps into what you were trying to do. So that's quite a success. I was, Meg, do you want to maybe share a little bit about your translation process, whether there was anything that you did differently for this book than for some of your projects beforehand?
Yeah, I would love to. And I hate to be pesky, but do you think it would be useful if we read a little bit to give a sample?
Yes. Goodness, this is a good time. I totally missed the boat. This is a very good time. Yeah,
then
perfect.
A little bit about
that's not pesky, that's helpful.
Process, because it will be very figurative. There will be lots of hands involved. I'll keep going on for a long time. So let's let's give everyone a
Thank you for the reminder. I got so, like, excited about, like, jumping right in that I just forgot. So, all right.
It was
so
great conversation.
I'm going to mute myself.
Thóra, do you wanna start us off with a few lines from the first?
Yeah. Meg and I were going to read a few chapters from the book. The chapters are short, and I will be reading. I already wrote it in Icelandic, but now I will be reading it in Icelandic. And I will only just read short excerpts in Icelandic, and then Meg will pick up and finish the whole thing, like each chapter. So the first chapter of the book is called Chlamydia. Ég vissi ekki að þetta yrði svona mikið mál. Það ekki eins og þetta sé óafturkræft. Það enginn að fara að deyja. Við tökum bara lyfin og eftir 10 daga þetta búið. En honum finnst ég núna vera algjör drusla. Sem ég svo sem alveg. Fyrst ég farin að smita menn af kynnsjúkdómum. Mér finnst það mjög ósanngjarnt að þetta skipti svona miklu máli. Hann lætur eins og ég hafi hafnað honum af því ég var með öðrum mönnum. Við vorum ekki saman því ég fór til Suður-Ameríku. Við höfum farið á 1 date og ég hafði ekki einu sinni sofið hjá honum.
That was a nice sound. 1 date.
1 date.
So the smile is really awkward now that I'm going to read it. Chlamydia. I didn't know it would be such a big deal. It's not like it's incurable. Nobody's going to die. We'll take antibiotics and then 10 days later, it'll be gone. But now he thinks I'm a total slut. And I must be, since I've infected people. But I think he's being unfair. It shouldn't matter this much. He acts like I've rejected him because I've been with other men. We weren't together when I went to Central America. We'd gone on 1 date and I hadn't even slept with him. I was traveling alone, so I slept around because I had nothing better to do and I needed to fill in the gaps. I didn't know that something would grow between us. In fact, I thought it'd never happen, but I became more and more taken with him as I traveled. He sent me near constant emails, and he was always ready to talk when I went to internet cafes. We just started to connect. When I came home, we clicked. I fell head over heels. He's beautiful and smart. I don't know how many books he owns, hundreds at least, and he has this crazy DVD collection. But the chlamydia kept eating at him. He wouldn't stop interrogating me about the other boys. I held back at first. I only told him about one guy, a Norwegian in Cuba, and then I added the next one to the list, followed by the third, the fourth, The 5th, fuck, I can't be expected to remember everything. I tried to explain that my memory isn't really that great, but he thinks I'm lying. We were gliding on a smooth current, and now he wants nothing to do with me.
Okay, thank you. Fyrrverandi fyrsti hluti. Honum þykir ennþá mjög vænt fyrrverandi kærustuna sína og þau eru góðir vinir. Hún er ótrúlega sæt og fáránlega klár. Hún dúksaði á fornmálabraut í MR, þau kunna bæði latínu og eru svakalega viðlesin. Geta vitnað í Derrida eins og ekkert sé.
The ex, 1. He still loves his ex-girlfriend and they're still close friends. She's elegant and clever. She was at the top of her class in classics in school. They both know Latin and they're both well-read. They toss Derrida quotes around like it's nothing. The other day, he asked me to meet him at a coffee house. So it was more than a little strange that he was sitting with her when I arrived. I felt humiliated and I wanted to leave, to turn around and walk straight out, to disappear. But they'd already spotted me and I had to sit with them. It was one of the most uncomfortable afternoons of my life. I was stressed, sweating like a pig, and I got this weird tremor. They were so relaxed together and so much smarter than me. They talked about movies I hadn't seen and then went on and on about things I hadn't ever thought about. The ex tried to bring me into the conversation by explaining, among other things, what a strawberry milkshake was. It's when a man comes on a woman's face and punches her in the nose, giving her a nosebleed. Snowballing, she went on, is when a man comes in a woman's mouth and she spits it into his mouth. He's told me about sex with her, how nice it was, how talented she is at blowjobs. I'm pretty bad at them. I just gag.
Viljastyrkur fyrsti hluti. Hann hringdi, sendi skilaboð, en ég var teflonkona. Allt hrökk af mér. Viljastyrkur annar hluti í svona korter.
Willpower 1. He called, left a message, but I was a Teflon woman. Everything slid off me. Willpower 2. For about 15 minutes.
Orð. Hann algjör meistari í að snúa orðinu mínum gegn mér. Hann man allt betur en ég og getur rifjað upp ólíklegustu hluti sem ég hef sagt og sett þá í óheppilegt samhengi. Þegar við rífumst ræðst hann á mig með orðinu mínum. Þá líður mér eins og stúlku sem hefur klippt af sér handleggina og afhent honum í góðri trú. Nú notar hann líflausa armana til að löðrunga mig.
You're gonna have to give me a second on that one. I didn't have it marked. What page do you have it on in the Icelandic?
90. No, not 90. 78.
Okay, it'll be around there then. I have these written down in a different order.
Yeah, I see what I did there.
Sorry, everyone. Oh, right, I wrote down the page number though. Okay, without further ado. Words. He's a master at turning my words against me. He remembers everything better than I do. He just takes the most uncharacteristic things I've said out of context and frames them in an unflattering way. When we fight, he bombards me with my own words. Then I feel like a girl who's cut off her arms and handed them to him in complete trust. Now he's using my own lifeless limbs to hurt me.
And finally, sérstaða. Ástin okkar hrá. Við treystum hvort öðru fyrir kvikunni sem enginn hefur komist nálægt áður. Þegar mér líður eins og ég hafi húðflett sjálfa mig með ostaskera, minni ég mig á þetta. Ást litróf, hún jafn sár og hún góð.
Special place. Our love is raw. We trust each other down to the core, something nobody in my life has ever come close to. When I feel as if I've flayed myself with a potato peeler, I remind myself, love is a spectrum. It is as wonderful as it is as painful as it is wonderful.
Thank you both. You're both excellent readers. So yes, thank you very much for that. I think it's actually really interesting to see you both read side by side, because you can sort of see the way that your personalities both like sort of overlap in the material and also like take on a slightly different interpretation. So I think that's great. So yes, to this end, Meg, since I was rushing ahead before, would you like to talk a little bit about your process when you were translating this book?
Yeah, I love to show my drawings when I do this. So I get very physically involved in my translations, even with a book that's less intense than this one. I'll start to get back pain after half an hour. My wrists will hurt because I do a lot of this kind of thing, you know. And when I'm doing that, I am also kind of scribbling all over the book and making these crazy incessant notes that start to look to me like it's kind of hard to see because it's like light color.
Hold it closer up. Yeah, hold it closer up to them.
Like you see, like, and we'll cover that note. That one's a little gross, but the scribbles will sort of, they have their own characteristics, and I use them as, like, these are pretty normal. This is pretty tame, but I use them as musical notes and as directions or cues when I'm translating, which was something that was actually particularly helpful with this book, because it's the kind of text that's very relentlessly painful, I think, and sometimes a little funny. That willpower one is a little funny, but and so I had to kind of follow my own gestures and follow my own cues that I had sort of recorded when I was reading it in order to keep a pace with the translation, to know when to pause, to know when to take a break. And it also sort of emphasizes sounds, right? Because I'm first and foremost a poetry translator. I guess that's the sort of the most fun part of the process. Is there anything in particular I can speak to, maybe?
Well,
excessive note taking.
I like the obsessive note taking. I have my own like notational system, but it's actually a lot less physical. I tend to do it in digital documents. So it's sort of interesting to see you like actually marking up and sort of tracing your way through like a physical book. What you're talking about in terms of sound and poetry, though, does segue into one of the things that I think is most interesting about this particular partnership, in that you're both poets. And Thóra, I've read this book a few times in both Icelandic and in English, and one of the things that really strikes me about it is that that the format and these really short little chapters, these episodes, which are sometimes only a few lines and sometimes it's less than a page. They have a very poetical quality, and your language in general has a very poetical quality. It's very spare. You pick and choose your words very precisely. There's no attempt to sugarcoat anything or use euphemisms, and so all of the emotion and the catharsis in this book feels really acute because it's really unvarnished. It's really raw. And Meg, I know from working with you, I know that you're one of the most precise choosers of words, I would say, of anyone I know. So I've watched you toy with a word or a phrase in a poem for days or weeks, and just kind of keep coming back at it until you get it right. So I'm interested to hear you both talk about how poetry and being poets and this sort of poetic practice impacted the way that you wrote the book and translated the book.
Well, for me, when I was writing the book, it wasn't intentional that it was this poetic piece. I think that for me, I'd been thinking for a really long time about writing this book, and I had a very clear sense of what kind of story I would like to tell. But it was only when I started doing these explorations and experiments with the narrator's voice that I found Lilja's voice. And when I found her, it flowed very elegantly, the writing of the book, I think. So, and for me, I think it also displays in that, I mean, I'm a young writer, and before Magma, I've only written poetry, so that's what I know. So I think that also influences my writing a lot. So, yeah.
How about you, Meg?
This book felt like a really nice place to land. So I had been intensely translating poetry in very small, spare, minimalist poems, and then immersed in sort of these Baroque American contemporary poets for a number of years before this translation. So about 5 years, I think I was pretty fixated on this, and I think I needed to get outside of it a little bit. And this novel straddles poetry and it straddles confession, right? Like confessional prose. And so because the chapters are so short, I was able to take the same amount of time with them. So I've told you this before, and I actually like to tell people this because I'm quite proud, which now sounds terrible. I've read this book 22 times. And that is partly because it's so, it's quite small, right? I mean, the language is spare, and it's often fairly easy to get through. So I was just able to have sort of the time and space that I would on a poem, while kind of thinking differently about language and bringing in contextual gestures that I don't necessarily have in the poem.
I think actually when you're talking about the book pulling you through it, one of the things that really impresses me so much about the book is how much momentum it has for a book that is very difficult. I think every time I've read it in one go, and it's a very it's got a lot of, it like propels you through it, which is really an interesting experience. So do credit to you, Thóra.
It feels like you're reading something very familiar to you, which is kind of what I think a poem should also do. I think that when you visit it, you should feel like it's something correlative to your experience, but in that sort of numinous way.
I think another thing that does this, that sort of moves you through the book, is the perspective, and because you're so claustrophobically, absolutely, entirely in Lilja's head, and you don't really mean, she interacts with other people besides the boyfriend, but you don't really, they're much less present, even when they're sort of protesting about like this relationship and the way it's developing. And Thóra, I'm interested to hear how it felt for you to be living in this headspace, particularly when you were like going back and forth between like teaching young children and then, you know, coming home, and like how did you negotiate being in that mind frame?
Yeah, it was excruciatingly difficult and heartbreaking at times, writing this book. I wrote it in the morning, like every time. Like I had this, I think that also plays in, you know, the structure of the book was that my time was spare that I had also, or that's how I experienced it. So I would wake up early every morning and write a chapter, and then the next day I would like write it up on the computer and like edit it. So that was my process. Like every day I would like write a new chapter, and then I would edit it, and then like go forward with the story like that. And there, because in my head when I started, because I had been thinking about it for such a long time, I knew where I wanted to take the character. So I had this dread, like there are like really difficult scenes in the middle of the book where, like the days before, I was just like, oh no, it's going to happen. Like, oh, I don't want it to happen, but it's going to happen. And then I would, you know, like wake up early in the morning, write these texts, and then I would just have to like try to like perform a mini exorcism on myself, and then go to work and like be around these like innocent, beautiful children that I was teaching at the time. So yeah, it was a challenging and strange experience. But with the narrator's voice, of Lilja's voice, and her perspective on the story, is that what I was like aiming for when I was writing it is that the reader is always smarter than Lilja is, the main character. The reader like sees all the signs and sees like everything that's building up, but Lilja and the main character, the thing about her is that she's not stupid. Like she's very clever. Like she's a very like clever and well put together young woman, but she chooses to have this tunnel vision on her life and on her relationship. So like whatever red flag that comes up, she's just like, no, it's okay. Like it's probably nothing. And then like she keeps on going because she has this very clear agenda that she wants to be with this man. She has found the man that she wants to be her boyfriend. And she has this, you know, like Icelandic work ethic or something, and she just works at it. And then yeah, so that's something that can get you in a lot of trouble sometimes if you like never. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what I was going to say, so it's okay.
I think it's very relatable to this the sort of tunnel vision, and even if you haven't had this particular experience, I think we've all been in that sort of mindset where you're just like you're focused on this thing that you think that you want, and you're going to make it work no matter what, even when you have all signs to the contrary that it's just not going to be good for you. Meg, how was it for you when you were translating this? What, like Thóra is describing these sort of coping strategies almost to get through this process. Like, how was it for you to be in this space?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, that what you just said about having tunnel vision makes me think back to when I was about 20 years old, and somebody told me there's a little guy standing in front of you and he's waving a yellow flag and you are ignoring him. That is all. So I've always pictured a small cartoon man waving a flag at me when I'm yeah, so you know, Thóra, you said that as you approached this climactic point in the novel, that you felt a sense of dread because you knew it was coming and you didn't want it to happen. felt the exact same way as I worked through this entire novel. So oddly, I did most of the first draft while I was on a business trip in Boulder, looking at a TJ Maxx, which gave me some humor. But it was very, Lilja is very much like me in my early 20s. I put myself in very dangerous situations, partly because I came from a culture that was very suppressive and very conservative and expressed itself in violent ways. But I also felt like spending time with that person who had also been injured by certain individuals who had gone through a traumatic experience or a series of multiple traumatic experiences. And I knew that I was going to have to spend a lot of time with her because I was going to be spending time with Lilja, who's the protagonist and who really became an ersatz Megan, a proxy Megan. And it's really hard to look at yourself for that long and to be alone with yourself. And it's partly because you start to feel hostile and angry the more you have to sort of look at the decisions you've made and look at the things that have been done to you, and you experience shame and you experience blame repeatedly and memories and flashbacks, and it's sort of this continuous onslaught. And so I started to get really angry and really resentful toward the text, and I actually wrote down a quote here from the poet Charles Wright that reminds me of this, because I think that this anger and this resentment that I felt were absolutely essential to the process for me. He says, "Some things move in and dig down like pieces of small glass your body subsumes when you are young." The book felt like those pieces of small glass, but eventually they just became a part of my body. They were, excreted, or whatever happens to those small pieces of glass when you get old. I hope they come back out. I'm not sure. But it opened me up to a period of self-reflection. And I think that made the text a lot better, because I was absolutely unwilling to compromise any word. And I was absolutely unwilling to give up. That's Moo, she's my therapy cat or something. But this is a completely unique experience for me, feeling something so strongly, like the entire room was vibrating all the time. I employed strategies like creating a psychological safe space, which is something that I had done with my therapist later, like after the first part of the translation was done. There was some other sort of visualization and stress relief technique, but this was good.
I think
it's all anything.
Yes, yes, certainly, in very interesting detail. I think it's a unique experience, and I think it's one of those things where, like, sometimes there's like a text that matches itself quite well to the translator, and even if it's this quite difficult process, what you get as a result can be quite powerful. And I think it's also important to note that there is a hopeful arc to this book. So I don't want to under or overstate the difficulty of it, but I think that that's one of the things that also has some power to it, is that the character, you do watch the character sort of step into a different self. But sort of on that, in a more content-oriented vein, I think this question that we sort of touched on at the very beginning about this idea of like, why does someone stay in a relationship like this, and why does this character, who's actually quite intelligent and quite put together and has a lot going for herself, why does she allow her boyfriend to treat her so badly, and why does she stay in this awful relationship? And yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on that, Thóra.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question that we ask ourselves all the time about friends and relatives or personal experiences. When we look at like people who are in like toxic and difficult relationships, and that was what I wanted to explore in this book. That was, you know, taking a relationship that was thoroughly abusive, but in the story nobody raises a fist, like he never hits her, and he never and she always has, you know, a sense of free will, like she so for Lilja, when she is in this relationship, she doesn't feel victimized, or like she doesn't perceive herself as a victim and him as an abuser. They're just two people trying to figure out how to have a relationship. But that's sadly what happens to so many people, because you want to see the best in your partner, and you want to believe that things are going to turn out okay, and you want to have hope when you finally find someone that you're in love with. So I think that was very important to look at, and also to have Lilja a character that yeah, for me it was like very important that like Lilja never perceives herself as a victim. And although she is in this like horribly abusive situation, and I think that like the story, it's like a period piece. It happens in 2007, and it's about mental and sexual violence. Like that's the type of violence that she endures. And like at the time, like around 2005, 6, 7, like these were things that people never talked about. Like that wasn't in the narrative. Like emotional violence, that was just something that, you know, people had found out in the late 2010s. That was a thing. So I think that, yeah, for me, like it was important to like explore, like take this like story and like turn it into like a story that is fictional and is a work of art, and is like something different from like the Me Too story, because yeah, because the Me Too stories, I mean, I so much like respect and admire the courage of women who have like taken a step forward and told their stories. But for me, like when the Me Too was happening, like I was like fixated on like a Facebook chat board of like Icelandic women telling like horrible stories about abuse that they experienced in intimate relationships. And what I discovered like going through it was that like being an abuser is such a cliche. Like the sentences, the words that these men were saying to the women that they were with, like it was like they had this like handbook of like being like of like how to like hold on to them and how to like make them feel small but still stay like small enough but not too like, yeah. So yeah, for me, I was like so interested to see how like these conversations and these like things that were happening between people, here's my English not helping me, that these were like events that were going on a loop, like all over town, like in all these houses, and like all these women had been so ashamed of like having been this like one stupid person who had taken like these terrible decisions, and like at the time it was just like this one tiny decision and then another bad decision, and then like it adds up, and all of a sudden you're in this like horrible relationship. But there's this great sense of isolation when you're in that kind of relationship, where you feel like you are the only person on this planet who was this stupid to let things go on for so long and get this bad. So I wanted to, create a story that, like takes these things and presents a narrative that's, more, universal and away from the personal, but still, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You really do sense, because you're in her mindset so deeply, you really do sort of see that slippery slope too, and how difficult it is, like after the one bad decision, and you've made a series of decisions after that, like it gets harder and harder to kind of walk yourself back from it, because I think you sort of see her like realizing how much she's invested in it, and you don't want to tell yourself that that wasn't worth it. And if like there's a sense that you can't back out of it, and so you sort of see how somebody gets sort of sucked into it. And I do think it's a very common experience, a very unfortunately common experience. And so, but yeah, one that is just so surrounded by shame that I think this is, yeah, it's an important thing to have a larger dialogue about. Interestingly enough, the boyfriend is the only one who doesn't have a name, and I mean that feels like a very pointed choice. And I would, yeah, why is he the only nameless character in the book?
Yeah, I chose to have him nameless. Yeah, like you said, he's the only nameless character in the book, and that's because, I mean, he represents so many douchebags out there. Like there are a million other guys like him out there. So that's one thing, and also like I was thinking about giving him a name, like when I was writing the book, being like, what's his name? Is it Marcus or something? I don't know. But then I was just like, he doesn't deserve a name. Like he takes everything away from her. And like the name is the most precious gift that you're given. It's like the most precious word that you will ever hear in like any language. That's your name. So whenever you hear someone say your name, you're just like a little bit extra happy, being like, what, me? Yeah. So he didn't get the name. He didn't earn the right to have a name, I think.
I love that choice. I really do. I don't know if we have any QA questions from the audience. I haven't.
Yeah, we have one. So
we have one. Okay.
So if anyone does want to ask a question, please do write it in the chat. And this comes all the way from the UK, which is nice to see. And I see that Magma is being published in the UK at the end of this month, so you can purchase it then. She started reading Icelandic crime books, and she's very excited to read a new author from Iceland. And she is wondering who inspired both you and Meg as a writer. Who are some of your authors? Sure.
You want to go first? You go first.
Okay. That's a good question. I don't really have a concrete list of authors, but in Iceland, we read a lot of each other's work. So Iceland has a very thriving literary scene, and we have so many good authors. It's insane, actually, considering how few people we are. We are like a nation of 360,000 people. It's like a neighborhood in New York or something. And there are yeah. So, and there are so many like inspirational geniuses among them. So like, I feel like, yeah, so there are like, there's like this, yeah, there are a few Icelandic writers that have really influenced me a lot, and that's to name the first is a man whose name is Sjón. That's his author name, and he has written several amazing books in Icelandic that have been translated into English. And he has this, and he's a poet, and he has this amazing way of intertwining mythology and folklore into these very spare and to the point novels. And I also, yeah, and I'm also, yeah, I think it's hard to name, like, yeah, there are so many that come to mind. And then also in like an American author that's really inspired me, that's Mary Oliver. I I listened to a podcast a few years ago. I had no idea who she was, and like people in Iceland don't really know who she is. But I listened to a podcast where she was like giving an interview and reading some of her poetry, and it had a very profound influence on me and my writing. And I mean, then I started reading her poetry, and it was amazing. So, yeah, I feel awful just naming 2 people, but I can't name more because then we would be here all night.
I think two good recommendations is good. Plus, I just actually put in the chat, it's not specifically people who necessarily influenced you, but you did just write that article recommending Icelandic fiction in English translation. So I've put that in the chat for people to look at.
Yeah, check that out. There I recommend amazing stuff from Iceland.
Meg, did you want to speak to any influences? Because I think it comes through as a translator as well.
You know, I want to, first of all, if we're looking for Icelanders, I want to recommend first and foremost Gerður Kristni. Her book Bloodhoof is actually a part of a trilogy of poetry books, but it was translated by the extremely skilled translator Rory McTurk, along with the book Requiem, which is the last one in the series. And then, Larissa, do you recall, or Thóra? There's one more.
I can look it up. I'm putting the first 2 in there.
And then,
I thought it was Reykjavik something, but maybe that was Requiem.
Requiem is the last one. And then there's Bloodhoof, and then there's one other in the middle. I really recommend reading that trilogy of poems. They are exceptional. And Gerður Kristni is actually one of the reasons I moved to Iceland. I read a poem and I just knew it was the place. But as far as my influences, Lucy Brock-Broido, mine are all going to be poets. Lucy Brock-Broido, the greatest, most Baroque poet who ever lived, my mentor in graduate school, and an exceptionally strange and brilliant creature. Louise Gluck, also a wonderful poet who, as you all know, probably, her poems have just forward motion, but it's gently observant at times, and she has those intermittent proclamations, you know, I am a Teflon woman, that feels so rhythmically correct. And then Anne Carson, because Anne Carson. I still have parts of autobiography I've read, memorized. I used to make fake tattoos with like ink when I was punk rock and 20, just write Anne Carson poems on my arms. It was not great. It was not a great time. But
well,
those are...
I think if we don't have any other questions from the audience, I have one more question that might like sort of wrap us all up in terms of like at least like sort of bridging this translation writering question. I'm just interested, Thóra, particularly since we had the chance to hear you both read side by side, which is not something that you often have a chance to do. Since you can read the book in English, and I believe you're multilingual, and you sort of have access to your books in translation, do you hear things come out of your work in other languages that maybe weren't, that you think about differently from the way that you think about the text in Icelandic? Do you hear like sort of different themes or qualities coming out of it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you said, I mean, I think in general my English is pretty good. And I worry that I was like a bit of a vulture when Meg was reading and I was writing her translation, because like she was gracious enough to let me like read it throughout, and I had like very like strong opinions about the text and how it sounded right to me, and we had like very good discussions on like how it was like supposed to be. So, and I feel very grateful to like having had an opportunity to do that with Meg, because when you're writing an Icelandic, there are so few people who can read your book in the original language. So it's so important that the English version is as like true to the original one as possible, because that's the one, like, I mean, if it gets like picked up by other languages later on, it's very likely that they won't even read the original. So yeah, so I think that at least for like Meg's translation, like we had a very good like conversation and collaboration about the tone and like the way we wanted to present it. And I was very lucky to have Meg with me, because she is, I mean, like we all know, like she is a poet, and she had these like beautiful suggestions that, I mean, I would have never been able to think of. So like, and I was just like, yes, I like it. Let's do it like that. So yeah, so yeah, I don't, yeah, I have, that's my answer to your question, Larissa.
I think it's I mean, I'm very happy to see it in English, and I'm happy to be able to share it with other people. And I think both of your voices come through in these very remarkable ways. I think it's a remarkable book. So everybody should go out and get a copy, because it's great. And it's just been so nice to talk to you both.
Can I point out one thing that Thóra said that I just really loved? And I think you said accidentally. You said when Meg was writing her translation. It just
I heard that too, and I loved it.
It's beautiful. I mean, it made me thinking about it like we think about it as a creation, and our collaboration was incredible. And I felt like I was creating it too, along with you.
There's I heard it too. So thank you so much for this, and yeah,